Good evening. Welcome, welcome. I think I know most of you, but I don't know all of you. I'm Pastor Ken Blythe, and through the grace of God, I have the honor of being pastor here at St. Armand's Quay Lutheran Church. So on behalf of the wider, greater family of St. Armand's Quay Lutheran Church, welcome to you all. I've been tasked with a couple of things. First is to welcome you. I did that. But just in case you were sleeping, welcome. Another important thing to know is that our restrooms are just into the narthex and turn right. There's a table over there with several bottles of wine. That's right by the restrooms. If you go beyond the bottles of wine, you're going in the wrong direction. That's also a backhanded way of saying, when we're done today, don't be in a rush to go home. Magically, as we meet, the narthex will be transformed into a little reception area, and we'd love it if you'd stay for some refreshments. You would be very, very welcome. The third thing to say is, as I look subtly towards the camera, welcome to everyone who's joining us beyond these walls. This was advertised by the Synod, by the conference, and by the congregation. And I know within this worship space we have folks from other congregations, and I know that online we'll have people from all over the place. You are welcome, whether you're joining us on Facebook or whether you're joining us through our website. Welcome. If you happen to be joining us through our website, once this conversation is done, don't just click end. Stay for a while on our website, look around, and learn a little bit more about us. We'd love to see you here in person, but until then, it's wonderful to have you connected with us online. What's going to happen next? Once I finally fall silent, I'll start speaking again, except it'll be a prayer. So we'll begin the evening with a prayer. Then I'm going to introduce you to Richard Mooney, who, along with his wife and a whole team of helpers, they really are our Lutheran World Relief people at SAKLC. They make wonderful things happen, and he's going to start to connect some dots for you. After that, Steve Gunderson, our congregation president, will come up to the podium. It's a podium tonight instead of a pulpit. Steve will come up to the podium and introduce Daniel Speckhard, Ambassador Daniel Speckhard, who is our guest speaker tonight. So we don't get anywhere tonight until I say a prayer and then step out of the way. So let's begin with prayer. Good and loving God, we gather tonight celebrating Daniel's presence among us. We gather tonight celebrating the ministry of this congregation and the ministry of the Mid-Gulf Conference and the incredible ministry of the Florida Bahamas Synod. We have much to rejoice in and be thankful for. But good and loving God, this night, even as we look forward to the wonder of what's going to happen in this place, we remember that we are not the entire church here, and that there are manifestations and aspects of the church that struggle. And we remember them tonight. There are people beyond the church that Lutheran World Relief reaches out to, connects with, accompanies, serves. And many of these people, Lord, are struggling in ways that we cannot even begin to imagine. And so this night, we remember them. And for all of the people, Lord, who are overlooked, excluded, pushed to the margins, forgotten about, at best forgotten about, at worst attacked, we tonight remember them in prayer. Be with them, be with us, surround us with grace. For this we ask in the name of Jesus Christ, who is our Savior, Redeemer, and friend. Amen. Richard, would you come up and share a few words?
Thank you, Pastor. I'm not much of a public speaker, but I did make a bunch of notes down here that I'll be reading. My name is Richard Mooney, and I would like to take an opportunity to talk about the Lutheran World Relief projects here at St. Armand's Key Lutheran Church. And a good note is that this is actually the only global outreach that we currently have, and it's a very important one. Many of you are familiar with the beautiful quilts that are on display here, as well as throughout the church when they are blessed before they are packed and shipped. But did you know that there's actually a dedicated group of 4 to 10 women that gather every Monday and create 150 to 200 quilts a year? It's an incredible achievement for that small group. Through the summer, it's typically running around 4, but this time of the year when people come back into town for the winter months, it goes up to around 10 people. But it's an incredible group of people. Also, it should be noted that this project is funded solely by donations. There is no line item budget for this, so it's all done by donations. The second project that we do here is the personal care kits. My wife Linda and I oversee this project. We gather 1,000 towels, 2,000 bars of soap, nail clippers, combs, toothbrushes, and assemble these into kits. Sorry that I don't have one. They're actually out all on tables, and you'll be able to look on there and see what's in there. But we assemble these kits, and on one day in January, which is coming up at the end of this month, on January 29th, a Saturday, we will be assembling these kits and packaging them for shipment. It usually takes around 25 to 30 volunteers to make quick time of this. We pack 25 in a box. We create 1,000 kits, so we package them 25 in a box, and that takes 40 boxes. So we usually are able to do that with a 30-people group in about 3 to 4 hours from the time we start until we're all done. So busy bees. And also, this program is funded solely by contributions, donations. We have been extremely fortunate to have an anonymous donor over the years who has donated $3,000 a year to this project. And there is a challenge to the congregation to match this donation. This is very helpful. This is what allows us to do the 1,000 care kits. Excuse me. The 2020 Synod in gathering, they produced throughout the Synod 2,576 care kits. So as you can see, being that St. Armand's Key Lutheran Church provided 1,000 of those care kits, that we are providing in that particular year about 40% of all the care kits that come out of our Synod. So thank you. Thank you very much. It is quite an achievement. We are really proud of doing that. Usually we're running in that same neighborhood, 35 to 40% of the synods. Excuse me. Once the kits and quilts are packed, a label is placed on each of the boxes, and on this label is a barcode. What we were able to do a few years ago was incorporate the barcoding system that Lutheran World Relief uses for tracking of the product. So we did that, and there's a specific number that's assigned to our church. And again, this allows us to track globally where our kits and quilts go to. Over the years that we've been tracking them, we've had kits and quilts that have been shipped to Armenia, the Ukraine, Mali, Lebanon, Haiti, Zambia, Georgia, and Bosnia. So it's really good to see globally where we're going. And I have heard that at one point in time that personal care kits were sent to someplace in the United States. I believe there was a disaster up in Fargo, North Dakota, with a bunch of flooding and some problems, and I had heard that that care kits were sent up there as well. So thanks to Lutheran World Relief for a global effort. A few years ago, we visited where these end up at. What we do, let me back up one little bit. Next month, in February, after we package up all the care kits, they're loaded onto a U-Haul truck, and we haul them down to Emmanuel Lutheran Church in Venice. That is the staging point for all of the care kits and quilts for this side of Florida. There's 2 locations that the kits go to. Excuse me, there's only one location that we go to, and that's Emmanuel. So what we do is, once they are all gathered there, a tractor trailer runs around Florida and picks up all these kits, and they take them to New Windsor, Maryland. New Windsor, Maryland, if you're not familiar with Maryland, is somewhat west of Baltimore, kind of northwest of Baltimore. Lovely area. We had an opportunity, myself and my wife, to visit New Windsor a few years ago. It's a large distribution center for the East Coast for all of the collection of the prepared personal care kits and the quilts for shipment. Their process is once the kits and quilts reach the distribution center, they are repackaged. Approximately 25 kits are repacked into a standard shipping box, which weighs approximately 50 pounds. So they have to standardize, because they ship globally, they have to standardize to weight as well as physical dimensions. The quilts, what they do with the quilts, they take approximately 35 quilts and they put them into a bale. It's quite an interesting process. They have this humongous machine. It looks like it's from probably the 1930s. I don't know, maybe it is that old. But they lay out plastic. They take selected quilts, they fold them, and they stack them inside this machine, fold the plastic over it, and this big plunger comes down and crushes these all down into a bale. Then they band them with plastic. Each of these bales is about 110 pounds. So they bale them to a standard size, and they try to keep them to a standard weight for shipping purposes. If you've ever had an opportunity to go visit New Windsor, Maryland, and see this process, it's really quite interesting. Once the bales are boxed, or once the boxes and bales are then moved into a warehouse area to wait for a request for global. My understanding by talking to the people at New Windsor is that they don't have an order that says, okay, we need 1,000 care kits next week, so let's get that order. These are like staging. It's an on-demand type process that if people needed something, a location such as Bosnia or Lebanon or Syria or wherever needed this, then this request would come into Lutheran World Relief, come into this particular location, and they would stage that. All of the product are put together into a containerized shipping container, like what goes on a ship or on the back of a tractor trailer, and away it goes. Quite a process. What I have done, I've made some literature available on the back tables for what Lutheran World Relief, some of the various projects that they're with, or what they do in part of their global outreach. It's very, very interesting. Again, if you would like to help on this day of packing in assembly, it's on January 29th, a Saturday. There is a link to a calendar that's created, and that link is in Connections. I don't know exactly what it is at the moment to pass it out, but the link is in Connections. Also, there are donation envelopes on the back table that if you could give for a donation to either Lutheran World Relief for personal care kits or for the quilts, it would be really appreciated. So on the envelope, mark whether it's for personal care kits or whether it's for the quilts. Thank you very much.
Richard, thank you very, very much. And to Richard and to Linda and to everybody who does this, thank you. I keep telling Ann Walburn that I said, if somehow we can figure out how to share with people all these wonderful good things we do, there will be all kinds of people, and especially younger generation people, who want to join us. And we've just got to figure out how to tell this story in a way that gets out there, because I'm just amazed when I watch all the different things coming out of our community service ministry committee and the church and all of that. And you and Linda, you've been an icon and an example for all of us, and just know how much we appreciate that. So some of you know, I had the privilege of serving on the board of Lutheran World Relief. And the gentleman who asked me to serve on the board, wasn't long after I joined, he decided that he was going to leave. And I don't know if there's any connection between the two or not. But anyway, you know what they do when they have these big organizations? They hire some professional search firm to go out and try to find the best person possible. I was not on the search committee, and that was just fine with me for lots of reasons. But they came to me one day and they said, "We think we found someone from Wisconsin to be our next president. How do you feel about that?" And I said, well, obviously, if they're from Wisconsin, they're going to be great. For those of you who are guests, I'm from Wisconsin. Live and die, Badger Red. So I then had the privilege to meet Daniel Speckhard. And in April of 2014, I had the privilege, along with the rest of the board, to vote to make him the next president of Lutheran World Relief. In preparation for tonight, I did a little bit of research, and I got to say, kudos for the transparency on the websites, by the way, because I found a lot of things I didn't expect to find. Some questions I'm going to ask him over dinner, but we won't get to those. The others are that I think he has, since 2014, almost doubled the budget in the programs. And yes, absolutely. And I don't know if he will say this, so I will. You need to understand that the national offices of the two Lutheran churches have diminished and diminished and diminished their support for Lutheran World Relief. And we can have that conversation over a beer sometime. But what he had to do, he had to recognize that that was happening, and he had to build a new source of support. And at least when I was on the board, it was individuals and congregations like this that were making that significant difference, enabling Lutheran World Relief to grow. And my guess is that Daniel will tell you even more of that story in his presentation. What you ought to know is he has a long, distinguished diplomatic career. That career has included being ambassador in Greece and Belarus. I think I got that right. Yes. And I think one of the most interesting assignments that he had was the deputy chief of mission in Iraq. And we could ask him to speak just about that tonight, but that's not why he is here as a part of the speaker series. He's a descendant of a long line of Lutheran pastors. When he completed his work at the University of Wisconsin, and he was sort of a professional student, he got a baccalaureate degree, then he got a master's degree, then he decided instead of going to work, he'd get a second master's degree. So he's had lots of education, and that then led him into the diplomatic work with our federal government, which has now led him to all of us. We are privileged and honored to have this incredible guy. I was thinking earlier, you know, sometimes we reflect on the fact that people from very common backgrounds, like many of us, I suspect, in this room, rise up sometimes to do some incredibly uncommon things. Daniel Speckhard is one of those. He is one of our church, one of our faith. He is one of our common commitment to use our faith and our resources to do good. Please welcome the Ambassador, Daniel Speckhard.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for that. Thank you for that great introduction, Richard, and all you're doing with the church. And thanks to the Honorable Steve Gunderson. Steve was my conscience on the board, reminding me that, it's easy. You'll see tonight, it's easy to get absorbed in these stories of the people we're helping. But there's just as many stories in these churches, right, of people that want to be used, want to be the hands and feet of God in the world. And he was the one always reminding me, Daniel, don't look just overseas, look here at home and make sure you understand the flock here that is providing all this good sustenance that allows us to do this good work in the world. So thank you for that, Steve. Thank you, Pastor Ken, for inviting me here. It's exciting to be in this church. I see a whole almost town named after you. That's pretty cool. Pretty excited to be down at this end of Florida, especially after 2 snowstorms up here in Washington, D.C., where I just came from. I do want to talk a little bit about Lutheran World Relief tonight, get you familiar with it, but I want to do it in a personal way in the sense of that you'll see some of the stories of the people that you're helping with your support. We wouldn't exist if it wasn't for congregations like you, and people like you. And we wouldn't exist even if it's $5, if it wasn't for those little pieces that come in. That's really how we operate as an organization. We've been doing this for 75 years. 2020 was our 75th anniversary. And we've been sharing that love since that time with our neighbors around the world who really need it. What I want to do is take a little bit of a look back, and then we'll travel around the world together. Let's start with a little bit of a story of where we started. And I hope you can hear this. If you just slide so you can see that screen.
1 in 5. That's how many Lutherans were left homeless at the end of the Second World War. In 1945, Lutherans in the United States mobilized to respond to the humanitarian crisis in Europe through a new agency called Lutheran World Relief. The mission quickly expanded, sending love where needs were greatest. Now, 75 years later, you continue to respond to God's call to be the body of Christ to some of our most vulnerable neighbors throughout the world. Your love is reaching further, bearing more fruit, standing faithfully alongside our neighbors in need, no matter where, and no matter how forsaken. You are a light in the darkness for those in need around the world. We give thanks to God for your faithful partnership. Please persist until your love reaches every neighbor.
Go. So I hope that inspired you a little bit. I had, in fact, I hope seeing those faces of the people that you're helping gives you a real sense of joy. I had a cab ride over here, Uber ride. The Uber driver was asking me where I was going, what I was doing. I told her a little bit about Lutheran World Relief. She said she thinks we should make it incumbent on every family to figure out how to send their teenager to one of these developing countries before they graduate. And I thought that was a good idea. A little bit expensive, but a good idea, because I think when you see these families, you see the situations that they're living in, and the poverty that they have to deal with, it makes you feel so blessed, but it also makes you feel like you want to turn your heart and compassion to others, which actually we know is a great thing for ourselves in the end, that God knows how that helping others helps ourselves. We're in 4 regions now. I showed this map just to give you a sense of the places we work. We work really in the poorest, most fragile countries of the world. And in those poorest, most fragile countries, we work with the poorest and most marginalized communities. So you're really reaching the poorest of the poor. And that is how Lutheran World Relief has always seen its mission. Fits well with our faith. It's the people Jesus hung out with. It's the crowds you always found him gravitating towards, and that's where we like to be as well. It's the places where your dollars are going to make the most impact, or these quilts and these kids. I'd like to show you a little bit about, as we look through some of these different places, take you around the world, and start with one here in the border of Nepal and India. This is Bhagwanti Davi. Bhagwanti lives on the river banks of the Gandak River, and it's the river that separates Nepal from India, the border. And she, like many of the communities around there, struggle to survive. They're fortunate that the ground is very fertile because of the river there. So when things are good, they can grow enough food to feed their family. The challenge, of course, is this river, and you see them growing some things there with our help, that the river floods every year around June. And it wipes out not just their crops, it wipes out their little housing structures. It sometimes, unfortunately, takes lives. So we have been working along that whole riverbed with multiple communities on both sides of the border, which is very unusual and difficult to do when you're crossing two different countries, to get the communities to work together to be able to have an early warning system so they know when the flood is coming, when the water is rising, and they can first and foremost take care of themselves. Second, we work hard with them to make sure the kinds of things they're doing in their little communities are creating barriers to erosion, so that when the flood goes through and departs, their farmlands and their little bits of plots of land can still grow new crops and not be washed away all the topsoils. And then last, we help them try to grow types of things that will survive and be able to grow another season even after a flood. For them and this family, like you can see her extended family, all the families are big in these places usually, and you end up caring for a lot of people of a family. This has been a very, very powerful experience to help them survive and become more resilient. Part of what we do is try to make sure that the support you're giving is not just charity, but that it's something that's going to be lasting, and that over time these families will be able to be self-sufficient and self-reliant and support not just their family but the future generations. I'm going to show you a little story here with a video on this one.
हम लोग का कोई सूचना नहीं मिलता था उसे। हम लोग एक बार सोकर उठे रात में ना तो पानी को देखे और हम लोग पूरा वो घबरा गया। सरकार के लोग थे, सारे लोग काम कर रहे हैं, पर ना असर आया। तब से काम ना भी कर रहे हैं, सारे लोग बोलते हैं काम कर रहे हैं। लोग बना पर ना असर आया। तब से काम ना भी कर रहे हैं। गेहूं बहुत नुकसान हुआ।
I hope that's as inspiring to you as it is to me. One of the things I also forgot to mention there is you might wonder why these people live there when every year the floods come once you move to higher ground eventually. But as I mentioned earlier, where we're working with usually the most marginalized groups, there's a strong caste system, right? So these people aren't welcome in other places. And so it's not easy to just pick up and find another place, to find another plot of land, to to be able to set up a new house and to support your family. So finding ways to allow these people to not only survive, but to thrive in the places where they are is really a powerful thing. Let's move now to the Middle East and to Lebanon. I'd like you to meet the lady on the screen here. Her name is Amal Al-Halabi, and she knows, like many of us, that people really just want a chance to work, to provide sustenance for their families, and to ensure that they can take care of their children. And so she has been an inspiration to us because we've been working with her to support refugees in Syria, from Syria into Lebanon. You may not know this, but actually there are more displaced people and refugees in the world now than ever in any other time in the world. In fact, the last time this had happened was after World War II, when there were roughly 40 million displaced people. There are now over 65 million displaced people in the world, and it's getting worse, unfortunately. And you can imagine what it's like to be displaced, be in large camps, or be in places like this, especially now with COVID and other kind of things, and how difficult it is in this world to get stabilized, where the global economy is also a bit fractured as a result of the global pandemic. So we've been working with Amal and the refugees there, and I wanted to share a little story about that.
The economy in Lebanon has made life harder for everyone, especially refugees. So many people come here with nothing. But I have a love of giving, and I wanted them to have a source of income. So I gathered some women in my kitchen, and we started cooking together. My name is Amal Al-Halabi, and this is my kitchen inside Lebanon. I now have 8 women working together. We run the kitchen during the school hours so everyone can balance their work and their families. We make ready-made Lebanese dishes like stuffed grape leaves and kibbeh and sell them at local supermarkets. People love them because they are time-consuming dishes to make at home. Even during the pandemic, my business has grown. Restaurants were closed, and that really helped to create demand for our food. Recently, Lutheran World Relief helped me to buy a commercial oven and a pastry machine to increase our production. I think everyone should be able to work regardless of their circumstances. My mission is that anyone who wants to have a job, they can come work here. It wasn't food, it was humanity that brought us together.
I love that one, especially at times where we struggle. I know I try to stay out of politics and how difficult the issue of immigration is, but I love this woman here who decided to just use her own initiative and entrepreneurism to figure out how to take advantage of these situation that was a bad one for her country and for these poor Syrian refugees, and turn it into something where commonly working together they were producing food for others. It's an inspiring story to me. I'd love now to take you to Latin America, speaking of something closer to home here. And you may remember that in 2020, while we're just struggling with this global pandemic, Latin America got hit by back-to-back hurricanes. Iota and, forgot the other one. Iota and, We'll remember that in a minute, but you probably remember it better than I do because you're closer to those places and you're watching hurricanes a lot more closely than we do up north. But it was devastating for the communities that we work with down there that are already impoverished. I'm going to tell you about one here, which was Ernest Lemus in Honduras, and the hurricane came to his place. And he's a cacao grower, and here's his house. 12 inches of mud and raw sewage were in his house. And I want to show you a little video on this one to show how your help made a difference here.
Sabíamos, pero lo agarré de sorpresa como a las 4 de la mañana. No, no.
Steve knows this, something about these programs. I think that's inspiring, I hope, for you to see how you respond with your resources, how we respond with you quickly. We were there within 48 hours on the ground providing support after those hurricanes. One of the things that we do that Steve knows well is that when most organizations come in, they dump off some supplies and then go on to the next one. When we create a relationship like this, we stay for a while because the reality is the devastation that happens in these kind of situations take years to kind of really, truly, fully recover from. And if you don't do that work at the front end, what you're going to end up is with a community that isn't able to recover from those kind of disasters and get back on the feet. So we pride ourselves at Lutheran World Relief, and a part of the Lutheran ethos is that you stick with your partners and friends and neighbors until you're sure they're okay. So that's something powerful about what we do, and that I'm proud of the way we use your resources. I now can turn to something that I know is close to Richard's heart, which is our longest serving program, and that's our Quilts and Kits program. That was started in the distributions you saw at the beginning in 1945 after World War II, from families torn from the war and displaced from their homes. And we've gone global about 5 years after that, 1945. We started doing that in other places, and we became known for doing that in the places where nobody else was going to or worrying about, the villages that the world had forgotten. Today, we do about 300,000 quilts a year, and I believe about 100,000 personal care kits and hygiene kits and other types of kits for those. In times of devastation, these are really powerful. You know, I was trained, one of those masters that Steve mentioned was an economics master. And One of the things I wondered about coming to Lutheran World Relief was the quilt program, right? Not because I didn't think it was really cool and beautiful, but as an economist, it's not very efficient to make these quilts here, put them all, send them down to Manuel, move them up to New Windsor, send them on a ship over there. Why don't we just buy a bunch of blue blankets from Turkey and send them to Syria or some other place? But then I got out and I got to see how these quilts were being used, and it radically changed my thinking. When I saw in a hospice, for instance, in Calcutta, where sex workers were living out their last days who had been diseased by AIDS and had children running around in the little lot, that their beds were covered with colorful things like this instead of some gray cloth, and that came from a gift from somebody here in Armand's to let them know that they weren't forgotten, that they were loved. In fact, one of the stories that is told at Lutheran World Relief is of a woman who, with one of our staff in West Africa, had been thrown out of her family because she had gotten pregnant, and she was in a care facility, and someone gave her one of these blankets, and she started crying, and she said, "Thank you so much. I thought God had forgotten me. Now I know he still loves me." That's the kind of stories that are repeated thousands of times. And if you're a refugee in one of these camps with 10,000 other people, and everybody's getting the same package of food, the same little tin pot, and you all of a sudden get a quilt that's different than anybody else's quilt, it's a sign of rebuilding. It's a sign of resilience. It's a sign that your life can start again, and it is a sign that you haven't been forgotten. So I want to thank all the quilters here and all the people doing those personal care kits as well. Going to run a little video here as well on this for you to take a quick look at.
I enjoy sewing. I've sewn for a long time, and I think it is a wonderful way to put colors together, to make designs, and to give somebody a lasting memento that they will have for the rest of their lives.
I'm hoping that they find it as beautiful as we do, and they appreciate it. It's made with a lot of love, and I am hoping that the person that receives it will have it for a very long time.
Enjoy it. Find comfort in it. Know that the people who made it for you thought of you the whole time they were putting the quilt together, and know that God loves you.
Beautiful, isn't it? It reminds me over and over again that it's about relationships, right? We're doing this work of helping people lift themselves out of poverty, but at the end of the day, what God is about in our lives is making sure that we're in relationship with each other. And that's what Lutheran World Relief tries to do with your support, with these quilts and these other things, reminding people we're all connected, and their pain is our pain, and that we suffer as a community. There's a photo here that I kind of ended up the quilts part with that I just could not leave out, because I know a picture is worth 1,000 words. And just take a moment to look at those faces and those smiles, and to know that's the kind of change that you're having. And these are young people, right? These are next generations. How exciting that is, that we can make people feel that way just by doing a little extra work in our lives. We also do these personal care kits that Richard was talking about, and literally 100,000 of those. So important. You saw the floods in Honduras and the hurricanes there. They were there. They're in places all over the world where it's needed, where crisis and disaster hits. Eta and Iota. That's why I was struggling. Those were the two hurricanes that hit. And these hygiene kits made it even more important because of the pandemic, right? That you needed to just be able to stay clean, and you didn't have anything anymore. So the soap and the kits and the washcloths and other kind of things made a difference. You know, there's something else about that, and that's personal dignity that I find is so important in the work we do. When your life is completely turned asunder, when you have no longer a household, when you're on the move because you're displaced, just being able to keep yourself clean, brush your teeth. May not have done that in a month because you didn't have a toothbrush, don't have the resources to get a toothbrush. Those kind of things just, you know, allow you to feel human again. So it may sound like simple things to you, like these little kits with these few little things in them, but to a family that has absolutely nothing, it actually means giving dignity back to those families. There's another group with some hygiene there. That was in Honduras, some of those towels that go with those kits. I get asked a lot, okay, we've seen this now, what more can I do? There's so many ways you can engage with us, and I think, as Steve said, online, there's lots of good things if you go to our website at lwr.org. But I wanted to mention one because it's important and helpful to us, and that is if you could be a monthly giver, because the monthly givers are the ones that allow us to help plan. We love the resources you give. We count on St. Armand's. You guys punch above your weight, both as a church and as a donor, but if any of you are out there aren't on kind of just this little monthly giving, whatever it is, we like to encourage like $29 a month or more. It makes a difference because it allows us to plan in those ways. If you are into the disasters, in the sense that those are the things that touch your heart, we also have a campaign called World of Good that allows us to get ahead of the disasters. Because what usually happens is your checks come in after the news has arrived and everything else, and you start hearing about it, but we got to move right away. So if we are able to build up some funds into those things, we can go immediately, especially to the places where it don't show up on your television, which is becoming more and more and more as our news feeds have been filled up with other stuff besides the disasters and challenges in the world. So I would welcome that. I'm going to close now with a last little bit, which is, that's kind of the things that we've been doing that I think you probably are aware of a lot of those things. But some of the things that you might not know about is kind of the stuff that Steve was talking about earlier in terms of how we're really challenging ourselves to have bigger impact in the world. And I wanted to talk about 4 ways that we're doing that. And I guess I would like to start by saying, and even challenging you as a church and everything, if you have a plan and you think that plan is achievable and reasonable, my view is it's not a God-sized plan. Because that was what we came up with. We figured we can do it. We're all humans here, especially we come together, we'll be able to manage this. I really think God is testing us to constantly think of way beyond what we think our capabilities are. And He's just waiting to get His Holy Spirit in there and help you to achieve things that you can't even think about. That's what we've been doing at Lutheran World Relief. Ways we've tested ourselves to try to figure out what is it that we need to do better to make sure that these families that we support actually have lasting results, that they aren't having to come back for more assistance every 3, 4, 5, or every year, but instead are lifted up and out. And one of the things we found is that we need a more holistic approach to their challenges, because if you're reading about one of these farmers that make up 80% of the world's poor are actually in rural areas living on subsistence farming, their challenge is that if the rain stops or they have a drought, there's nothing. They can't even beg because everybody's in the same situation. So we help them with that. We help them with the water. We help them with being able to make their crops more productive, help them with storage because there's so much waste there. But that is not enough. We need to think more holistically, because if mom gets sick, everything goes, because everything has to be sold to get her, even just sometimes the transportation to a hospital in a larger town or regional center. So we started seeing that there's the issues of education, livelihoods, and health, and the environment are all linked together. So as a result of that, we've come together in partnership with a group called IMA World Health, and we actually put ourselves into one big tent, and we now do health programs and health projects together alongside our rural development and poverty projects, alongside our humanitarian relief. So that's one of the ways we're thinking about this, and we're finding that if you look at through the eyes of the family, you're going to see a very complex and multidimensional challenge, and we're going to start figuring out how to address more of those needs at the same time. So I hope you'll watch the stuff that we're sending you, the literature, the videos, and you're going to see this more holistic approach to how we do this. The second thing we're thinking about is leverage and scale. This one's fun to talk about because I know Lutherans in particular love to get their dollars matched. If they can get $1 and turn it into 2 or 4 or 8 or 10, that's exciting. So we have taken that same idea here and said we need to be doing things at scale. If we help one village, but they're in a sea of poverty around them and all the other villages are still suffering, it's hard to keep that village up without slowly going back to the mean of the area. So how do we actually engage a whole district or a region? And to do that, we need to be larger. We need more scale. Part of that was raising more funds, which we've done, as Steve has said. But we've also decided to partner with foundations, like the Gates Foundation, with government programs, and not just the U.S. government, but the regions, the UK, and others, and international organizations to make sure these projects are large enough so it's not just one village, but a whole district that helps push people to be able to get out of poverty. And that's been exciting. And I would say your dollar now goes at least 3 to 4 times for each dollar you get in terms of how we're going to multiply that in terms of impact through additional dollars that we're going to match that with. The third area is business and enterprise development. Any business people in the room here, people who've had some business background and stuff, you know, it seemed like oftentimes in the past that there's business over here and then there's church and doing good and nonprofit over here. But the reality is the business is one of the most powerful ways you can impact people's lives when it comes to poverty. We're part of an economy, we're part of a global system, and the reality is just doing good over here as Lutheran World Relief and giving something to somebody becomes just handouts if we can't turn it into economic activity. So recognizing that, 5 years ago we started something called Roundup Investing, where we did small micro investing in businesses to help them launch and become successful in ways that can help their villages and communities. And the idea there is most of these farms that you see, that these little smallholder farmers, the challenge is they've got maybe 1/4 of an acre, right? And then they have 5 kids, and then they grow up in 20 years, and they got to divide that 5 ways, and they each have 5 kids. It's not sustainable. You need other economic activities and businesses to support that. So we've been investing in things like coffee production, so that the coffee farmers can actually send theirs to a socially minded business, which will give them as much as possible of the value of that coffee when they turn it into processed coffee and send it over here. Similarly, you might see we've started something called Farmers Market Brands that has farmers market coffee. I think Steve said you have that for visitors here. That's direct trade to cut out 3 or 4 or 5 different middlemen who would usually take a piece, and instead that money can go straight back to the farmers. So the coffee you're drinking goes to help those farmers out of poverty. That's the way we're trying to think innovatively of how we're going to have lasting solutions to these challenges of poverty. The last thing I wanted to mention is technology. This is no surprise to you, which is one of the things that is going to be part, in my mind, of the revolution in the world that needs to also be brought into the poorest and most marginalized areas. So we actually brought into our organization a technology company of about 60 people who do coding and work with laptops and systems development. And they do projects like in South Sudan, where they work with the school system there, where challenges are that most kids drop out of school by 10 or 11, and what happens then is the girls get married by 12 or 13, and what happens then is usually the health suffers tremendously, because if you have a baby at 13, it's actually very hard on your body and your systems, and at the end of the day, these women have girls actually have very tough times, and so if we can keep those girls in school longer, you'll find that that education helps lift them out of poverty, helps whole communities, and not surprising, as the girls get educated, communities actually thrive. With the technology company, what we've been able to do is work with the Ministry of Education to give tiny little incentives to use Nokia phones to find out who's in school every day in these very rural areas. The teacher will put a letter by each person on a little text. It'll go and populate a system back at the Ministry of Education, and it'll tell you which student is in which school each day. And then each one of those schools will get extra money for having more kids in school. And each family that sends their girl to a daughter will get pennies a day, which doesn't sound like much to you, but to them it's a lot, especially if there's actually no way to get resources to send their daughters to school. They have gone from 800,000 kids in school to 1.8 million kids in school through this program. Exciting. And 45% of those are girls. So that is humongous achievement for us. We're so excited about that, and that's the technology side of this. You also heard Richard using technology to track where these things go. It's also about corruption, the challenges of corruption in the world and how you bring transparency to that. If you study poverty, it won't take you long to start realizing some of these governments aren't doing their job, right? That there are resources there and it's not getting to the people and the programs aren't going there. If you start using transparency through technology to show exactly where the money's going, to show exactly what projects are being done, and to show who's getting it, it can be a powerful incentive to make sure development really happens. So for us, that's really exciting. That's it for me. I want to close with two things and then open it up for questions or discussions. The first is I want to say what a privilege it's been to be your arms and feet in the world. I think for me, this has been a job of a lifetime. Steve mentioned it. I've been an ambassador. I've been all sorts of other things, worked in war zones and stuff. But this is the kind of work that touches the heart, and it wouldn't be happening without you, every one of you that's contributing and supporting this in some way. But I also think about that, and I think I'm actually doing you guys a big favor. This is the verse that Steve knows well that has guided me through my 7 years here with Lutheran World Relief, that reminds me that God is actually giving to us when we give to others. And it's Isaiah 58:10. It says, "Pour yourself out for the hungry and satisfy the desires of the afflicted, and your light shall rise in the darkness, and your gloom shall be as noonday." And I just love that because I thought about that. Your light will rise in the darkness, and that is what you are doing. But did you hear the end? Your gloom will be as noonday. And it's no surprise that psychologists have found that actually one of the ways to help fight against depression and anxiety is actually to serve and minister to others. And so this is exciting partnership we have, right? That we together can be blessed by helping others in such need. So thank you for being part of this team. Thank you for doing that. And if you'll let me, I'd like to close with a prayer. Good and gracious God, thank you for this time spent in conversation this evening. I give you deep thanks for the people of St. Armand's Key Lutheran Church and for the many ways they are sharing their love with their neighbors. Guide us in our partnership, God, to reach your children all around the world who have the very least. May those who would otherwise be forsaken know of your deep love through our faith and actions. We pray all of this in the name of Jesus. Amen. So thank you again for your partnership. I am more than welcome to answer any questions or have a conversation or listen to comments.
Thank you very, very much for who you are and what you do. I don't think we can take questions from our live stream audience, but I think we can take questions or comments from our on-site audience. And while you're getting up the courage to ask, because I know you're all Lutherans and you don't want to be the first one to raise your hand, I've got a question. Share with us a little bit of the challenges you face globally today with the security of your staff. It was one of the eye-opening experiences just as I was leaving the board that you had to deal with this new issue of security. Can you share some thoughts and stories with us?
Yeah, thank you, Steve. I mean, that has been, in my time, in my career, 4 decades, the thing that has changed so dramatically. When I started international affairs in the 1980s, if you had a red cross on your vehicle or a red cross on your badge, or you were a journalist or a UN worker, an aid worker, you were essentially neutral and you were still dangerous. You could get killed, but you were never in harm's way other than being in the wrong place at the wrong time. That's not the case today. Aid workers are actually targeted, right? They're seen as parts of political battles and ideological battles going on in the world. And so aid workers are routinely kidnapped and killed in the world, oftentimes out of the political challenges or the ideology, but also sometimes just criminal, right? For kidnap, for ransom, and other kinds of things. So it's become much, much more dangerous to do this. A couple of things that we do to try to offset this. First and foremost, I think this is going to be a trend generally, is you need to use more and more local staff. The idea that I can go out there and look like me in the Middle East or in Nigeria or a place like that and be handing out things is a target, right? But that's okay anyway, because we do need to push more and more that the local capacity for people to do their own service delivery of some of these resources, support, and supplies and programs. So we work really hard to make sure it's local partners or local staff that are doing that work. They can fly much more below the radar, and they're much less visible. But even those people are going to be visible because they're doing good, and that doing good may actually get people upset, because that may be seen by extremists as upsetting what they're trying to do, which is make everything look chaotic. And so for that, we make sure we do things like we have transponders in all our vehicles so we know where they are. We have very strong safety protocols that we know when people are going out, when they're coming back. People aren't allowed to drive after dark, so we have to make sure they're able to get in or get out or get into a hotel by the time it's dark. And we always make sure there's locals around that really understand the local environment, that if they're coming from a capital or somewhere else. That being said, we've been fortunate. We have not lost, we've lost people to things like accidents. But, oh, I'm sorry, we've lost, that's my problem. I wander around. We have lost people to accidents, which is also one of the largest dangers in the developing country. But we haven't lost anybody to kidnaps, terrorism, or violence yet from the other sources. But I can tell you our counterparts like Catholic Relief Services and World Vision have. So we know it's out there. We're just praying to avoid that.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Interesting conversation. I chair the Community Service Ministry here at St. Armand's Key. And one of the difficulties we've had last year and this year because of COVID was because of the supply chain, not being able to get product, towels in particular. This that you have partnerships with businesses and that kind of thing. Has Lutheran World Relief ever considered having a source that we could purchase our supplies and things from that would be consistent, that could be delivered? Has that ever come up for consideration?
Yeah. We try to be very professional in our procurement of supplies and equipment. We actually do pre-position things. That's why we try to use some of these resources. So we have a couple of places around the world, including one central place in Qatar, which is kind of centrally located halfway around the world, so that we have stocks in supply for some of these things. But we also look for partnerships, right, for businesses that want to support us. We haven't so much had success in terms of people's supplies. Earlier days, pharmaceuticals would want to give, especially a year before they're expiring or something, they have excess supplies and things like that. But that's gotten more dicey because you have to be careful with pharmaceuticals, especially as they get close to their expiration date and things like that. What we have had is we are working, for instance, now in a partnership with a bunch of large businesses to work in the Northern Triangle on youth development. So Microsoft, for instance, has partnered with us to come up with a proposal for U.S. Agency for International Development to do training to youth in those places. And Microsoft will use its technology and its learning software and other kinds of things, and we will supply the workers and the structure and the infrastructure to get it out there. And we will put together probably 3 or 4 businesses like that with ourselves to map out what can be a good partnership to bring their skills to bear on that side. But if you have ideas of companies that you know of that you think would be especially sensitive to this kind of topics or issues, would love to be there. The other thing I have to, though, say is sometimes we'll get businesses that are really good motivated, but the cost is just way out of line with the developing country context. You know, they'll have grain storage bins for corn and stuff, and they look cheap in the United States, but they aren't as cheap as using mud and straw and creating a brick house and putting a cement floor when labor is virtually very inexpensive in these places. So we sometimes have to navigate that challenge of what is reasonable for the developing country context. But I love your question. Yep.
Richard,
Yep.
I was going to say, Linda and Richard have been going to every Walmart in a 50-mile radius since October collecting towels, taking everything off the shelves. And so that's why I was wondering
Great. Yep.
if there'd be some way you could...
Yes, absolutely. And in fact, mentioning Walmart, we did have a project with Walmart where we were providing, the farmers were providing produce for their stores in Central America. So it would be our farmers, which would actually be the produce into Walmart stores as part of their supply chain in that places. It gets a little harder to get it all the way to the United States, but you're on the right track, and we'll definitely keep working in that to that advantage.
I have a question for you. You mentioned at the end of the presentation that you're looking to engage people in business. And so is that maybe a component to what Ann was just talking about, getting kits out and supplies and things? Is there a way to mobilize the people who are receiving these packages to also make more and contribute and kind of leverage all of that?
You mean on the other side with the people who receive them?
Yeah, you're talking about coming up with a business, lifting themselves out of poverty.
Right.
So employing them by, assembling kits, for some kind of a wage, or producing some of the goods that go into a kit or something like that. Is there
Right.
a way to do that?
Well, it's not a bad idea. Haven't tried that yet. I guess partly what we're trying to do on that one, it's a good thought. The challenge is, like, if it's still dependent on our donations, you have a dependency still created in there. So what we've been trying to do is find businesses that are more locally sustainable without the input source. But it's similar to what you're talking about. So an example is in Tanzania. We had to have a project. The old project version was we would usually, when we're trying to help these subsistence farmers, part of the challenge is creating higher productivity, doing better farming practices, water conservation, being able to splice their plants, using just the right amounts of natural organic fertilizers that they create on their own farms and stuff like that. But there's a fair amount of knowledge that has to go in there. So we will take the brightest young people in those communities and turn them into community workers that essentially will become the extension agents of our program. We'll train them, and then they'll trusted by the community, train the farmers in what we're doing. Well, after we did that for a while, we decided, why don't we turn these into jobs for these? That isn't a job dependent on us. Why don't we help them open a little store? And that little store will provide the seeds, provide the fertilizer, provide the technology, not technology, but the technical assistance that's needed to be successful in the know-how to grow these things, like these tiny little hardware stores or farm stores. And we found out that it was successful, right? Because one of the problems is seeds, right? That when they buy the seeds from the local place and they're just a poor little farmer buying a little, they get all the crap. But if it's somebody from that community, they're watching, they know what they're looking for, they're going to get good seeds. And then they start trusting this young 25-year-old, and the next thing you know, he's got a thriving little business. So I think it's kind of what you're talking about, is how do we take these ideas of what we're doing for them and figure out how to create enterprise, entrepreneurship, and business out of it. But I love the way you're thinking.
Next question. What's the annual budget? How many staff people or workers do you have? How are they vetted? What kind of training do they get? And what percentage actually are sent abroad?
Probably, and this is all the different components really, because Lutheran World Relief is part of this family now that includes IMA World Health, it includes CGA Technologies, it includes Roundup Investing, and these other pieces. But together, we make up about annual budget of about 120 to 130 million a year. We have about 700 employees, and about 170 or so are in the United States. The rest are overseas. We have probably about 26 offices in the world, and we operate in about 35 countries. Career is very, all the jobs are advertised online. It's a meritocracy, and in the United States, these are mostly specialized kinds of jobs. Of course, we have IT and finance and accounting and HR, but then the program side, these are people usually with master's degrees in international development or economics or a technical field like health, infectious diseases, masters in public health. We have doctorates in different health areas, and I would say most of the people who come to us already in these program areas already have at least 5 to 10 years of experience, and most of them have some overseas experience.
Hi, I believe it's Lutheran World Relief that sends out a very colorful magazine each December, or some aspect of the Lutheran Church. I'm a grandmother, and I have always felt very upset that my children and grandchildren have had life very good, very comfortable, and they didn't really have the awareness of what was going on in the rest of the world. So that magazine that comes out, every Christmas I send it to my 2 children with a check for several $100s, $100 per child, and for them to sit down with the children and see in that magazine what you can do with $10 and what you can do to help with that money. And my grandchildren have gotten very excited about it. So I thought it's just an idea to pass around, because it does help them to see the need and how other people live.
I really appreciate that, and it's actually good to know. And I'm glad you're doing that. And I also think it's a good reminder to us not to give up on the magazines and some of the paper stuff. It's like there's this wave that overtakes us, but there's still something powerful about that. And sometimes it's even more attractive in a world of virtualness.
I'd like to ask, to what extent does Lutheran World Relief collaborate with other religious groups in different activities?
Yeah, I mean, greatly. We don't talk a lot about it, but we actually do a lot. So for instance, Catholic Relief Services and Lutheran World Relief are in the same city, Baltimore. We actually, I'm chair of a group called Bingo. That's the Baltimore International NGO group, and it includes World Relief, which are Baptists. Greek Orthodox is also based out of Baltimore. The Catholics and several other denominations have there. We also have partnered in some cases with a Muslim organization to work together. In Latin America, we have been what we call primes. We've been the project sponsor for a big project, but then we work together with CRS because they may be operating in parts of Honduras and we're operating in other parts, and we put together, as I've talked about it, that scaled kind of thing, a larger project to have more impact. So we work really well across lines with each other, and probably don't see it as much in the news because we're all competing for your dollars, and I don't want you to give them to World Vision, I want you to give them to me. But when it actually comes to doing good in the world, you'll find that we're all on the same team.
I'm going to cut it off. When we planned the speaker series, we said we would have a presentation from 5 to 6, and then we'd have a reception following. I think it's a good sign of all of you, and certainly of Daniel in this presentation, that it is now almost 6:20, and you haven't yet gone to the reception and the wine. The white wine might be getting warm, so maybe out of courtesy we should stop. But this has really been a wonderful evening, and I hope, I have to say to Daniel, when we put together the speaker series, and Brent and Ann and I and others in the post-COVID church, we sat down and just said, okay, who can we get? Who can we get? And I said, well, I got a couple chips, and I'm going to try to get one of them. And I crossed my fingers, and somehow it worked out, and he gave us a date, and here he is. And this has been a wonderful evening. And thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Steve. Appreciate it.
All right. Go to the narthex and enjoy.